We are live. Hi, Larry. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hey, Grace. Good to be here.
To start with the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So, you started your career at Nokia as a product and platform manager, and later on, so now you're at McKinsey for actually, it's over 12 years. And maybe we could start with what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shaping you into who you are today?
So actually, Grace, I'll tell you a story a bit differently. So I started originally as a programmer. So when I was about 13, I'm from Northern Europe, or Nordics, and we had what was called the demo scene. So demo scene was that we were a bunch of teenage boys and some gals coding computer intros, demos, so graphical representations. So I started there, and from there ventured into coding more broadly. So coding 3D engines, and then later on some financial software. So, and I started that because I used to be a physics major as well on applied physics. So background was in like self-learned coding, hacking things together, optimizing stuff, and then going into math and physics. Uh, and then from there, when I was in university, Finland has a system where you have to do a master, like before you graduate, you have to do your thesis at a company. So I did mine in Nokia on software platform, and I continued a couple of years after that to work in Nokia with large scale software platforms. So with Symbian and C60, which are the predecessors to iOS and Android. And then in 2005. Basically just felt that Nokia is getting a bit stale as an organization. And you could see actually many of the challenges they had. How the modern. By the way, Grace, you might mute because there's huge background noise, which
Wait,
live.
what about now? Can you hear the noise now?
No, now I cannot.
Okay,
It's better.
I changed it to AirPod. I just realized because, for the audience today, I'm at the Wall Street Journal private event, and then everybody else is actually sitting in the background, but I just changed it to AirPod. I hope it's okay. Thank you.
No, it's perfect. So just on a story, interestingly, Nokia in 2003, 4, and 5, when I was there, it was an organization that was at its peak on a technology that was quite modern. So mobile phones and the early smartphones, right? And then it got disrupted, obviously, by the next generation smartphones, so iOS and Android. And I think you could see kind of the first signs of that already when I was there, when it came to software. And I got pretty frustrated as a young person with that. And I felt that, I've been, of my short life by then, I've been most of the time coding. So I need to learn the business side. And I came to McKinsey 20 years ago in 2005, and I've been here ever since. Basically, working across industries, but always working with technology and similar topics.
I wonder, so I think from your experience at McKinsey, I can really resonate with you. I as a technical person, and then you kind of wanted to get the business side of insights, and now I feel you are full on in the business realm. Maybe we could talk about your day-to-day at McKinsey. Obviously now you run Quantum Black, so it's basically the GenAI and Agentic services globally, and you co-lead the McKinsey's technology and digital practices in the West Coast. Maybe we could talk about first of all what's a day in your life look like at McKinsey, and then we can go from there.
Very good. So I think saying that you're a consultant, Grace, it means everything and it means nothing, right? So when people think of a company like McKinsey at company, I think there's a lot of stereotypes, a lot of beliefs what we do or what we don't do. I think the reality is that McKinsey is quite a special company. Otherwise, I'm an entrepreneur, so I wouldn't have stayed here for 20 years unless it was. I think we have a very high belief that what McKinsey is all about is driving impact and change for and with our clients. So at some point in our history, and I'll tell the story for the audience for them to understand what McKinsey is all about. At some point in our history, that was all about strategy, right? So what companies needed, let's say in the pre-90s, so 90s and earlier, was a lot of strategy advice. the reality is that today companies don't nearly need as much strategy advice that they used to need 30 years ago. What companies need advice today, and what the difficulty in an executive's kind of daily life is, that how do they help their companies change, and how does the company stay relevant, which is a combination of strategy, but it's also much more actually how the company changes as there's opportunities to change. And so our role is to be a partner on that journey. So what my role is that for my own clients, I work with the executives and their organizations to help them execute whatever change the company is doing. And for me personally, I represent Quantum Black. So a lot of the work I do or most of the work is technology based. So how do we use technology to help companies either change their operating model, their services, or then just like improve their performance. And that includes, if you look at the range of things we do, is everything from strategy. So what we originally used to do, to basically, if you use a more modern language, we're rebuilding companies' workflows and processes on agentic technology to get more performance out of them. And performance might mean, faster time to market, better customer satisfaction, or just lower cost. So it's a variety of things. And to do that, if you again like make comparisons, we have our own products. We have a products suite called Eclipse OS, which is basically a full stack. Think of it like an open source Palantir. We have our field deployed engineers. We have our consulting staff, which is our change management parties, etc. So McKinsey, although it's a traditional brand, it's quite a modern company how it applies change at our clientele.
I wanna, maybe we could start with like, when you guys work with these like Fortune 500 company, you mentioned that like a lot of the people just want to stay relevant. So how is big tech companies thinking about like implement GenAI into their practices? I feel like living in the startup land in San Francisco, like there is a lot of coming from the smaller companies, but not every company can lead to scale like all these like big companies. And I wonder when they are thinking about like whether it's like purchasing a piece of technology or building in-house with their own like team or with you guys, how do you think about I guess what are some insights that coming out of big tech, like what do they pay attention to? And in terms of the 3 pillar that you mentioned, like whether it's like they want to stay relevant or they want to save cost, what are, I guess, like how do you think about like when you are chatting with a client, how do you kind of like onboard them into building in the AI era?
So first of all, let's talk about the difference you mentioned there between startups and between large enterprises, right? So in many ways, when you're in a startup, you're basically operating by the laws of the jungle. And what I mean by laws of the jungle is that your job as a startup founder, as a CEO, is to thrive. But you're thriving in an environment that is extremely Darwinistic, meaning, to use a quite used metaphor now, when OpenAI comes with the next version of ChatGPT or the applications on top of it, you don't know if you're going to survive, right? Like your business model literally might be wiped overnight. So I think a lot of the startup mentality and what startups need to do to succeed is to hustle. You need to be at the customer front. You need to iterate your proposition, your products, everything. That's not how a large enterprise operates. Because say again that you're a telco in US, so we have only few large telcos here. Each one of those has tens of millions of customers. You process billions of transactions per day. What you need is that you need ultimate stability, right? And the role of an executive in a large enterprise is to bring that stability, while at the same time be able to kind of change the direction of that ocean tanker so that you perform better, get like more out of what you have. And if you're doing really well, you do that by increasing the performance, but you also build something new to the side, so you refresh the business. That's a fundamental difference. It then comes to Craze. it's a long-winded answer, by the way. But how do you? Your question was that how do you apply AI as a large enterprise? I think the reality is that there's pretty much like three ways to apply it and what we're doing with our clients. So one is that how do we enable the existing organization to use technology? And enabling means that, crazy, if we're working together and I give you a ChatGPT license, the benefit of that license to our company is probably going to be close to zero. Very done. And the reason I say that is that, like, you're going to work better, Grace. You maybe have better insights, better customer propositions, but the net output of that in the company's revenues or its costs is pretty much like it doesn't quite change. So, like, technologies like AI on an individual level are very quickly becoming almost like a cost of doing business, and it's a requirement to be competitive. So, if you stay in the race, every company needs to apply AI for its existing organization, for employees. And I think what we worked a lot on is what are the effective mechanisms to drive that, change management, etc. The reason being is that probably everybody who follows your podcast are people who are interested on it. But when we do our studies in large enterprises, it's actually less than 20% of the employee base that retains the usage of these tools. So 80% don't use them in their daily lives, even if you give them the most applicable tools. So then the question comes that when even giving people tools, how do we help them and motivate them, incentivize them, train them to use in their daily lives? So that's category number one on you need to think. And if you're, for example, a startup, so let's say you're a new venture, you're selling enterprise tech. The big challenge, even if you can sell in licenses, in whatever you sell it, you might sell it, as a per seat, you might sell it consumption-based, sometimes consumption-based. The usage is not guaranteed. The usage is actually, let's say you sell 1,000 licenses, might be actually only 200 of those keep getting activated after the first month. The second category is that I think what we're seeing, Grace, quite a bit is that we're seeing increased automation at the moment, and automation just being for existing processes. So, and for your existing kind of organization, how do we automate tasks? I purposefully call it tasks because this is not a reinvention. It's more applying language model-based technologies in automating tasks within existing processes. And that's something where I think, especially this year, I've seen kind of agentic applications like this picking up quite fast. Where we're not yet is that I think what you could call like agent native enterprises. Almost like, remember, like, Grace, you're too young maybe to remember, like 10 years ago, we started to talk about, or 15 years ago, like digital native companies. We're going to have agent native companies. So companies who, design their customer engagement, design their offerings, their internal process around agentic tools. That has not really, I would say that we're seeing kind of the sun peeking from behind the horizon. So the first rays of light coming, meaning that if you're a large enterprise, they might have like 1 to 2 MVPs, so minimum viable product type of builds going on, but that's it. And that's, I think personally, like if I look at my job, what I'm excited about, that's what I expect to be doing next 2 to 3 years to help companies kind of start to do those journeys.
For sure. Since you mentioned about like the next 3 years, so I guess like when McKinsey work with any kind of like traditional companies, like how do you plan out their roadmap on like adopting these type of technology? As you mentioned, like, most people probably don't, like, let's call it like 80% people probably didn't really even incorporate like ChatGPT into their daily life. I guess like what would be your quote unquote like assignment for them, or like how do you measure the impact of like the technology that's implemented into the big tech or like big company in general, since like they probably move a lot like less fast than like the startup speed?
So here Here, Grace, I think this is probably a difference also in the companies. I think what we as McKinsey believe that we're very outcome-oriented firm. Outcome-oriented meaning that, we set a goal and we do everything we can to get to that goal. So I think the way we're running agentic implementations is that we do them against a potential. Typically, we start with more like think of it like a mini diagnostic or evaluation of what we believe can be gotten out of a process in terms of potential, whatever improvements it might be. And then we design the system to get there. And system, Grace, here means it's a combination of technology. It's a combination of changing what the company's organization operating model is, and how we do the things we do. And so my belief is that the only way to get value out of these implementations is that you gotta start first thinking that what is it that I want to achieve, set the targets, design the changes around that to lead you there, and then implement scale and like iterate. I think what doesn't quite work is that, the best way to lose money is to now say that I want to agentify a process X in my company. I'm going to take one of the GSIs in and bring one of the hyperscalers with them, and then they're going to be building tech for the next 2 years. I think the value most likely will be negative. Nobody gets NPV out of it because the existing organization will do the things as they're doing. It's very different from the emerging tech world, and talking as a former entrepreneur, because as an entrepreneur, you're building tech and you're hustling on the client front, and you're actually iterating both as you go. As an enterprise, you gotta kind of top down first say that, hey, what is it that I'm gonna change? Because whatever change I bring to my organization needs to apply at a massive scale, most likely. Then I'm gonna build that. I'm gonna slowly ramp it up over time, and then get the benefit out of the transfer from the original process to the new one.
For sure. I think one of the things I find really interesting is there are a lot of the startups are building, trying to solve the big tech company or big companies problem, let's say in the customer service space or in some of these really big bracket. I feel like customer service is just one of the most popular area where people start solving, as there's a lot of human component back in time, and then it's the cost center and all that kind of stuff. It's the call center and all that kind of stuff where very easy to be automated than a lot of these other functions. What are some trends that you're seeing from your clients are on which part of their business could be automated by AI easier than other areas?
So I think the short answer is that none, literally none, Grace. And the reason I say this is that I guess it's the most stereotypical thing that you have a 20-year-old Stanford dropout who a year ago moved away from home and now has set up a customer service startup. Sorry, I'm making it a joke, right? The reason I make it a joke is that even when you tackle customer services, winning in customer service, if we use that as an example, it's not going to be about having the best voice experience, meaning I can live interact with a voice. Because if you think about the best voice experience you can have with the lowest latency, is just you chatting with the ChatGPT app, right? Or Gemini. You're going to have half a second of a latency, so it's going to be practically near real time. It's going to be pretty good answer. However, that doesn't work for an enterprise. What enterprise needs to do is that they actually need to have some laddering in the process. So you need to have stage gating to make sure you check the answers. It needs to feed in the enterprise data into the processes. You need to be able to change the tonality, and sometimes even racking the model and changing the context in the system prompt is not going to be enough. So you're building actually quite complex systems. And for I would say that I think the challenge for current startups is that we're faced at an era of innovation where the technology moves super fast. The understanding of the processes a large company has and where you're trying to apply that technology, there's a gap. And the gap is that how do I move from a promise to actually proving and selling my value? And my guidance, like to many of the founders I interact with, is that like we gotta get to proofs of value very quickly. And proof of value is a combination of like having actually concrete cases where I applied my technology at an enterprise, and then showing understanding of the complexity enterprise faces, while at the same time being able to simplify that. I know it sounds complex. It is complex. It will be interesting to see because currently many of actually most of the startups are actually startups that are selling into enterprises, not anymore to consumers. The consumer space has almost like consolidated. So we have kind of the big models that are dominating. Enterprise sales is where enterprise engagement is where the next generation of winners will be set.
I have a question on this. So like, for example,
a lot of background noise again.
Oh no. Oh my God. I don't think there is. Yeah, I think I'm still on AirPod. I'm like, maybe it's like raining outside, so I'm like trying to find the most
okay. Just like
okay
mute it when after the question. I think it'll be easier for the audience.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for letting me know because I couldn't. Yeah, I can hear the noise. I hope. Okay, I'll keep the question short. So, I was just listening to the talk from the CFO of OpenAI just now, like on stage. So she was chatting about like, the enterprise side of things. So compared to the consumer side of things, all the startups are trying to do an enterprise product. I wonder like which kind of startup do you think will be able to and what kind of company? By that I meant like, so McKinsey have like a wide range of clients from like traditional company, like I guess like, the fleets or like, the PG&E or like PNG or like, all these kind of like traditional company to some of the most companies. I guess like, is there any kind of like onboarding journey that's like different between certain category of companies? And how does it work? Like which kind of industry is easier to implement AI versus others?
I think it's actually a very good question. So I think I didn't quite answer your previous question, Grace, when you went to the customer service. So if you think of like the areas that most companies are tackling today, it's like customer service, it's kind of G&A, so general administrative cost categories. So think of any like support functions and process, finance, HR, IT, etc. It's obviously development. Like we have a lot of great like development toolkits, IDEs, and models out there. I would say that it probably is those. I think what we're seeing, but in a more nascent stage, is then the more like operation critical processes. So like core operations, product development, more wider, etc. Those are coming. Now to this question. So what is actually the model for a startup to win? So what enterprises are buying, which is I think will be like an important insight to any startup executive or founder, is that enterprises want stability and predictability. What I mean by stability and predictability is that even if you have the greatest product in the world, but if you have not proven that product can be, you're predictable in a sense that, you can bring it to production in an environment that resembles theirs, it's very hard to conclude the sell, meaning it will be very hard to drive it through. So most enterprises, what they want is that they want these proofs of value. By the way, it's a term, Grace. I love the proofs of value because we started to talk about it a couple of years ago when the AI wave came, and proofs of value. Like I personally, I think it's been very popular lately, but this notion of like FDEs, so forward deployed engineers, I think it's quite a good notion. And the reason I think it's a great notion is that instead of selling a promise, you're selling actually a proof point, right? So you're going in, you're saying, let me prove this for you, and then deploy it for you. So I do think that, and I think it's known by now, but like I think a lot of like enterprise tech startups are heading to that direction. I do think it's the right direction. I think where the problem lies is that then as a founder, what are the capabilities you need? Because I also think, Grace, that the kind of the famous Palantir model, I personally think it's not the best model for the FDEs. And the reason is that, like, I think Palantir started at a very different era in technology development than we're dealing with today. And the big difference is that Palantir started with traditional machine learning. And if you look at a traditional machine learning, basically what we were dealing with insights from data. And insights from data can literally be delivered by a 20-year-old business analyst. So think of it just like this: if you can suck in the data, if I can digest data, if I can create the ontology, a smart person who has access to that, knows machine learning, can actually probably derive very good insights from that, and then we can develop those into predictive algorithms or whatnot. That's not the era we live right now. So right now, when it comes to enterprise tech, we live on the era of agents. It's a super, super different field. So you don't need that type of FDEs anymore. What you need is that you need FDEs who can go into a company. They can have a discussion with the COO of a company. And that discussion actually needs to be quite nuanced around the processes they have, what they require as executives in terms of, and remember, every executive wants stability and predictability in most industries. They don't want random crazy ideas. Like, that's a risk for them, right? They will get fired for that. They will rather risk not changing than getting fired and unpleasing their customers. So I think the FDE concept has evolved and it has become a lot more complicated, where the FDEs required today are people who have that nuanced understanding of the whatever domain, so function, industry, etc. they operate in, can have discussions all the way from like senior leaders to then the field and how we apply that, while then can also work with the tech stack. So the job has, Grace, gotten 20 times harder than when Palantir started their enterprise business 15 years ago, or roughly 15 years ago. And I think that will be the challenge for most startups, that even if you have something called FDEs, you might not actually have the right profiles, because because learning to work that way, it's still a skill that requires apprenticeship, and it's an artisan profession to be able to work that way, as long as humans are involved. Sorry, I went long way there, so bring me back, Grace.
I think that's really important. Like you mentioned about like stability, and there's a lot of nuance towards the process of like getting adopted to enterprise, and people prioritize like risk-free versus like, something more like edgy or like on like the cutting edge of AI or like any type of technology. So I wonder, when you're looking at these startup that's actually being able to get clients like the Fortune 500, how are they selling it into it? Is that like you mentioned about maybe they chat with the COO, like, was it always like from like the top down adoption kind of like perspective, or like how, like, a lot of startups like are asking me to like connect with them to like a Fortune 500 executive, but I guess it may not be the right executive for whatever they're selling. I guess, like, how do you think about the go-to-market strategy for the companies that are having somewhat of like a generally safe product and then trying to, enter the enterprise like clientele?
It's a super good question, Grace. I don't believe there's one recipe that applies, and let me explain why. So, and here, this might sound even a bit conflicting given the messages McKinsey is giving out. So we very much, Grace, believe in the change that you just now described, which is a change that in order for you to change some of your process to be AI native and truly kind of almost like reimagine the way the company is being run, it can only be done top down. And McKinsey works, we work very, very much executives down to the organization. And the reason is that we try to be involved in those bigger changes. We're not that, we're not the best partner when it comes to just like implementing tooling or integrating systems. That's we're not affordable there. But we're actually a very good partner for bigger changes. Now, if you're a startup, I think the challenge here is that the executives I know, Grace, most of them live a pretty luxurious life if they have the time to personally be involved in 1 to 2 bigger change efforts in their organization. And that's a if. So if you think like most executives, their daily life is consumed by their existing operations, their existing organization, and existing customers. This idea of an executive driving top-down change, which we are, by the way, promoting, it's very much a luxury question, meaning like if you're a truly distinctive executive, you're going to have 1 to 2 bets that you're making in your organization, and you're putting personal time into them. So then if you're an executive, like put yourself in their shoes. A startup comes to you, and the startup could have a very like known name, but startup comes to you and says that, hey, I want to meet you. I'm going to sell something like this in. Is this worth being my 1 to 2 bets, right? That's the question to be asked. And most of the time, the answer is, unless you're like OpenAI or somebody that every executive on the street recognizes, they simply don't have the bandwidth. And it's not because they're not interested, they just don't have the bandwidth. And even if they meet you, they're meeting you to learn. It's a very long road from that learning meeting to actually get to a kind of sizable sale. So I very much believe then, if the wind back down, is that you need to do both. So you do need to keep trying that executive motion, because that's actually where you're going to get then the scale. However, those proofs of value, if you can, are much easier driven with some cell in the organization. So some ring-fenced area where you can deploy. And it really doesn't matter if you're deploying something to 10 employees or 1 small process, you're getting 0 revenues. But if you believe that this is an organization you can land a bigger deal later, do that investment. Like literally do it as an investment, view it as part of your actually almost your product build. Similarly, as you're investing to whatever product or platform you have, view it as an investment, get the dollars later, and just accept that.
I think this is such a great insight, just because I think it kind of like counters a lot of what startups believe. A lot of people just think like, oh, if I sell enough, like, so you go from like, this SMBs to mid-market to, enterprise grade product. But like nowadays, like I feel like your insight is very valuable. Like a lot of the executives may just want your insights than like just like using your product in general. And then the sales cycle is probably a lot longer because you need to build trust with them, like from the ground up. Like unless you're like, the 1 or 2 bats, like you mentioned, like the big names, it's very kind of hard to like get there. I wonder when the executives from, yeah.
I'll add one thing there, which is that if you look at the previous big VC cycles, so venture capital cycles, where we had like explosions of startups coming, and we're now in the midst of the biggest. But the big difference is that we haven't had an enterprise startup cycle like we're having now. We never had that. We had online, right? We had mobile, we had other tech cycles, but large part of actually the startups have targeted mass markets or like SMEs, so much more like volume type of selling and volume type of engagement. We're in the midst of a super different cycle, and I think it's a much more challenging cycle to succeed in. So just as a comment for the audience.
Can you comment a little bit more on like why it is like the hard cycle to sell to?
Well, you actually, Grace, said it super well yourself a minute ago, which is that it's all about trust. It's all about somebody actually putting their operations, even if they're quite like not your mission critical ones, against the technology or an offering you're trying to sell and bring to the table. And if you're a startup, you're always fighting against that. You don't have those proof points. You don't have the organization to back you up. You're not Microsoft, right? Just to make a bit more lighthearted joke, Microsoft does not need to have the best product in the market. Their product might not be as good as yours, but given everything else they have 80,000 people on the field, they have 80,000 people outside the field, and they will be able to provide that support. They will win over you, right? Just by the sheer mass and credibility they have through the other means, not just the product.
I feel like actually this was a debate on like a previous podcast with one of the guests was he like all the innovations are coming from startup, which is totally true, but a lot of like and then like a lot of people were talking about like consumer would be the next enterprise, aka like from like the volume and the size. But however, I personally feel like all the big tech are also very innovative in the AI era. Like people like you mentioned about Microsoft, like a lot of the big tech, they are innovating within themselves. And also like you mentioned, I feel like they have a way bigger distribution channel that like any of the startup will ever have for a long time. When you're advising
and Grace there, I wouldn't put the big big tech down, right? And again, you can pick any name here, but if you're Microsoft, you do have an existing promise and value proposition to your customers. And basically what you are is that you're a platform company, right? So their mindset is that I'm building platforms that I distribute to 50% of enterprises globally. So like, I'm just, whatever the number is, but like Microsoft probably has their products in over half of all the companies in the world. So when they think of a product, they're thinking of a platform and something that scales. So it needs to have stability, predictability. When you're a startup, you're lucky to have an app that works, right? Even if you're a very fancy startup, you're afraid that it will just like bug and break down. It's a very different mentality in building products. So one might seem slower than the other, but in reality, that platform approach is meant for a very different purpose than a startup who's building their first product.
For sure. I wonder, so when you're advising these like big traditional company executives, like what goes through your mind? And then how do you advise on like the one or two bets for them to, make for within their own company?
Very good question. Also very difficult era to ask that question, Grace. And I think the reason is that, so let me start first that what I believe is will happen in most enterprises is that I'm first of all a big believer in the power of the technology we already today have at our hands. So even with LLMs, and it really doesn't matter how long you believe like how far the transformers as a technology scales in terms of capabilities, but already with what we have with today. So say, for example, that we have training data. So we can fine tune a model, we can apply reinforcement learning, and then we can build, which we haven't yet, by the way, done. So we can build agentic software. So I mean, more like software systems that are built on top of transformers. That can automate most existing repeatable office work, right? I would make a claim, and please, audience, challenge me, but like most repeatable office work can be automated what we have here and now today. So then the question goes that what should you do as an executive if you have that long-term belief? Because what we don't have today, and we don't have, if you look at things like that will need to come into place, so agentic identity management, observability of agentic systems, like FinOps to control the costs, security of agentic systems. All of these, we don't really have mainstream solutions out. And then if you look at like the bigger players and their launches, they're almost all in like beta phase still. So they might have announced something. So Amazon has announced Agent Core or AWS, right? But like you look at Agent Core, it's very much a product concept that they're developing. It's a great concept, but it's not out there in production. So an executive very much in my mind, and the right advice, Grace, at this point is that what you need to do, and I go back to the beginning of this discussion, do three things. Number one, experiment with the technology and give your people tools, but also help them understand why it's important. So do the change management for people to start changing themselves. Second, apply like low-cost automation on your existing process. So really just take the efficiency out. There's a lot of like wasted time and effort in back office processes, in business process outsourcing and offshoring type of stuff that companies really don't benefit from. We can automate a lot of that. But then thirdly, take few bets, but view those as learning, kind of almost like learning opportunities. So have a bit of skunk work mentality, even as a large corp exec. So take like 2 to 3 of your core processes, take a set of people at a side, and have them start, probably with, by the way, a tech partner, and then some implementation partners to reimagine that process. So thinking that at an era of agents, how could I run this my part of my business in a new way in an area like this? But don't bring it to like company scale production. You might have like a pilot set of customers and so forth. So experiment and view it as an investment to learn and change later. And then underneath, Grace, I think a lot of the basic like system modernization, data cleansing, having kind of much more universal data access, those are no regret moves. While at the same time, I do believe, like hard thing to say, but right now is not necessarily the time to invest into a lot of the big like system of records and enterprise systems. And the reason is that most of them are still architected for the, like, let's say the early to mid cloud era. They're not architected for AI. And if you look at like take like SAP, take like the CRM systems, if you look at the change they went through from on-prem to cloud, etc., I think we will do a similar change, but to the age of AI. And none of them have had the time to even think like what the next generation version of their systems look like. And 5 years from now, what you're going to invest into today might be quite outdated. So if you can hold on there, press pause. But invest still to kind of get to cleanse your data, to have kind of uniform data access, etc., which can be done on other systems.
I think I feel like you mentioned, like I think it's really important to like start something small and then expand into different like departments, like test things out first, then or having maybe a part of your team to test things out first, then going into maybe like a bigger expansion within a company. And I was like writing this down, like I wonder, like when you're thinking about like there's a lot of startup that they want to work with the big clients, and then like they become like quote unquote design partners with like the bigger companies, but how, like, as a putting on like your investor lens, like do you think those will actually pan out to be a great deal for the startup itself, or like how hard is it to close like what size of deals and for like the bigger companies? And is it realistic even, because as you mentioned, a lot of it's like kind of learning dollar, like the big tech, or like the big companies in general, they may just use you to learn stuff, and then maybe they become a design partner, they don't spend any money, but kind of like try to implement your product into a certain department to give it a try, but it will never land into like a deal itself. I wonder how would you kind of like evaluate if a startup actually could potentially land in some kind of like monetary way with a bigger company, or like it's kind of like 90% impossible?
So a couple different, very good question, Grace. Not an easy answer, but let me try something, and everybody can challenge me. So the question is, what are you first of all providing? And let me give you an example. So if you're providing an application that individuals use in a company, so let's say you're building the next generation cursor, right? I use Cursor as an example. It's an extremely successful company who everybody knows. The problem with Cursor is that there's already like 20 different coding IDEs out there. And if you're sophisticated, you might have heard of Cursor, you might know Windsurf, you might use Claude Code directly. If you're building like web apps, you use like Lovable. But then there's like 20 others that nobody knows the names of, right? The problem with that is that it's great, but it's a very Cambrian era and Darwinistic world, meaning like you have no stickiness. You literally have no stickiness. So what you're betting on, a startup like that is betting on that you have the best product, and you have not only the best product, but you get that like, it's almost like when you're paragliding, you need to get the wind underneath you to lift the kind of the paraglide, right? Like here, can we guarantee that there's a wind underneath you? So I find Craze these like more like enterprise applications that are used by individuals. It's a very difficult proposition to have that guarantee you're asking. Because even if you like pilot it with, let's say, 100 developers, so if you're a developer IDE, what guarantees that 2 months from now, there's some other company that has more hype and they will take over those pilot users and you never get to the scale of 5,000 developers. However, I think it's very different if you position your company not rather as an application, but you position it as a workflow or process solution. And what I mean by a workflow solution is that, hey, like let's take the customer service example. Instead of me bringing a chatbot, right? Like I'm actually bringing you a new customer service process. And here's how we work all the way from your products or services to a customer requirement fulfilled. So I'm actually re-engineering the way your customer service works, including the organization, by the way, you have there. That creates a very sticky proposition. And the reason it's a very sticky proposition, it's more complex, of course, to do, but the stickiness comes that once you're in there, once you've actually changed the workflow or the process, it will be super difficult for any executive to justify changing that. And even if somebody comes with a better technology, as long as your tech works well enough, you're in, and you will have a steady revenue stream. And I think like at this era, I believe like personally, Grace, like I'm not an investor. I'm probably like very bad investor because I'm too critical of everything, right? Like I'm a former entrepreneur who I'm pretty savvy on like enterprises and tech. So I go in and I'm like, okay, this will not work, scrap it. But like I believe in companies who address more of a workflow in the large enterprise space, and then are actually able to bring those proofs of value. And I do believe that if you build that proofs of value that we talked about, you'll actually get the sell. And then when you get the sell, you have the stickiness. So it becomes a self-fulfilling wheel that keeps on spinning. And that's a beautiful place to be in.
I have a question here. So also I want to give a shout out to like, hi Sanjay and then Corbin. We're gonna address your question at the end. I want to repeat so one of the things that you said, I was like typing notes. So one of the things you said is like basically like you have to mix your product into like a workflow process into like a big corporate solution. And I wonder how do you define like which part of workflow that you could enter, and how do you think about the budgeting? So like, is there a particular type of budget that's like bigger than others? That's why like everybody go into a customer service because it's like a big market, or is there like a particular I guess workflow that's like more valuable than the other?
So hard question, Grace. And the reason is that I think workflow is everything and nothing, right? Because workflow is just a process that we build a system around. I guess like I don't think I can provide you a universal answer. The only thing I would try to say is that it's probably also unrealistic for a new company to try to buy too big of a thing at once. So can you take a specific part of a process, almost like some domain, and say that, hey, I'm targeting this, and then expand later? Again, sorry not to be more specific, But I think specificity, meaning target something that is bite-sized, don't take the whole elephant, is probably the way to go.
I feel like some of the enterprise grade product are fairly successful, including beyond like the the ChatGPT or like OpenAI of the world. It's like Glean or like Writer AI. Those are some like company that I feel like find success in big companies. I wonder, have you like studied like how they actually entered some of these like bigger enterprises and like what kind of things that like I guess what was their entry point to make them more successful than their competitors?
Clean and Writer, very, very different products, right? Because Writer, I think you could claim, Grace, is I'm not a massive user of theirs, but that's more to me like an application platform I use for a specific purpose. I think Clean is interesting. Like, we should talk to Arvind. I think Arvind is a CEO.
Yeah, Arvin was on our pod, and then I think we both met Arvin at the same like
Exactly.
Madonna thing, right? Yes.
Great guy. We talked. I was impressed by him. You know what I loved about Arvind's story, and again to the audience, I'm not an expert on Clean, but like what I liked about what Arvind told is that if I got it right, I think he's on his third product generation currently. And what I mean by product generation, that they started pre GenAI. Like obviously it was after the inception of Transformers, but they weren't using Transformers. So this is a company that actually started with much more classical, like was it an enterprise search proposition, and then they expanded from there. So if you think, Grace, what they've had to prove is that they started with a specific, quite narrow proposition with a proprietary tech on enterprise search, and then they started like expanding from there. And today it's a lot more. But I think it just proves this point that have a specific proposition that is not me too, and go from there. By the way, I would also love to say, Grace, that like take OpenAI, right? Like what is it, like 500 billion valuation, soon heading to $1 trillion. Amazing company. But I don't think they have a recipe on how to win in enterprise yet, right? Because I think where OpenAI, their business model, if you look at it, it's foundation models that are amazing, but then run on a mass distribution platform. And mass distribution platform meaning, you have ChatGPT, right? And then you put applications on top of that. So OpenAI's model, it's really a platform and a mass distribution model. Like if you're able to, again, as a startup, it's very hard to compete with that. So if you have something that is just like an app that you give to people, there's very high chance that you'll be replaced, when the next release comes, or when somebody there comes with their new app idea, because they have the distribution. However, if you target a workflow, again, it's super hard to replace you. Because even if OpenAI is hiring FTEs today, so for their own forward deployed engineers, and they're building that, the focus of these people is like it's much more simpler. They're guiding their enterprises on like how to do few shots prompts on the existing models. It's quite simplistic work they do. They're not truly building custom built systems for specific domains. So I think the opportunity there remains. So I wouldn't be too worried about them. I would view them as an amazing partner and a great platform, but not a competitor to many of the enterprise tech companies.
I wanna maybe like switch the conversation a little bit towards trust. So one of the audience, Corbin, is talking about how can we trust AI. I feel like trust and safety is probably at the forefront of all these like enterprise executives' mind. And we constantly hear about these like crazy stuff like the airline tickets that's being like refunded or like going so like just like a random things that happens with the implementation of AI. What's your thought on like, what are some tools or like things that in the trust and safety space that you're passionate about? And how do you solve the problem of like, you're adopting some sort of AI, but also having the guardrails on like protecting the company to not make something crazy happen?
So I'm, Grace, personally not an expert on the trust and safety space. I'm what you would call a little bit dangerous street ninja in this space, meaning I'm, as much as anyone probably here, I read all the Anthropic's latest safety research. I'm pretty educated there, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert. My view is much more system engineering view. And as a kind of former and dabbling engineer currently. And what I mean by this is that kind of the system builds we're doing today, because like anything you apply is just not an LLM, right? It's a system. So first of all, I think like creating workflows that are more holistic, that actually have inbuilt like checks and bounds, right? So that have the laddering in there, that are also maybe hybrid systems, meaning it's not just LLMs, but we actually combine LLMs with traditional machine learning, more deterministic technologies. I'm not impressed, Grace, where we are yet. And the simple reason is that we haven't had time to build those systems. Because those systems, we go back to this notion of being workflow specific. You've got to build those systems for specific workflows. And if you like go back, like the earliest examples when we truly started to speak about agenting and agentic systems was about like early 24. So this was a year and a half ago, right? So it's very nascent in that sense. And I think a lot of the AI trust is about being able to engineer the right systems for purpose-built processes, because like the guardrails and everything, those would be very purpose-built, right? And how we build the evals for the models, etc. in there. So that would be my answer one. My answer two is that I think we'll see, like, I don't know how many of you heard was it Dwarkesh Patel and Andre Karpathy podcast? Like Andre was in someone's podcast. It might have been Dwarkesh, which is a great podcast. He spoke about kind of the size of the models and his belief around how we can kind of, the model architectures will get a lot more efficient, and we'll get down from like GPT-4, which was a 1.8 trillion parameter mixture of experts model, down to more like 10 billion parameters performing on the same level. I think like what we'll start to see in the future, that large enterprises will much more adopt the kind of small language model type of a paradigm. They will actually build or at least fine-tune models for very specific purposes. And the reason is that when we think of things like hallucinations, controls of the model, cost efficiency, speed, there's a lot of benefits that come from that. And that's, for example, when I say that, I'm sure like 1,000 people will challenge me and say that that's bullshit because the foundation models develop. But the purpose in many processes not to have the best model, right? The purpose is to have predictability. And whatever maximizes predictability and, of course, efficiency and quality it can be a much better solution often. So
for sure,
we need that engineering, and we need time to engineer, Grace. And this is something where vibe coding will not help us, at least in next couple of years.
I know. I feel like you can. It's very hard to vibe code a whole infrastructure. I want to be mindful of the time. Maybe we'll wrap with a quick 1 minute fire round for you. What's your favorite book?
I'm reading at the moment Brandon Sanderson, and he has a great fantasy series that I'm very entrenched in.
Wait, which one is that? What's the name of it?
Let me actually Google it. I just remember the last book, the book I was remember was Way of the Kings, but the actual series is called the Stormlight Archive. It's I think we're at this fifth book now, and it's just fantastic. I love it.
We'll totally check it out. Who would you invite to your dinner parties?
To my dinner parties? Well, I actually would love to have a dinner party with Elon and Sam in the same room. I would invite them both and I would cook for them. If I get them one-on-one, like I'll take that as well, but having them together would be special.
That sounds like a great party. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
So I was Grace. So there's many people. I would say that there's probably around 5 people throughout my career. like we all, we're human beings. We come to different stages in life, whether for various reasons, whether it's like unclarity what to do, where to go, uncertainty about oneself. So there's about 5 people throughout my life who have nudged me at a critical point in my life to get to the next level. Some of them I also blame, because Grace, when I was at the top of my coding game, when I was about 22, and I was a hard-ass 3D engine coder who was a physics major. I could be developing the LLMs right now, but then a friend of mine said that, Lari, if you ever want to gonna go to business, now's the time to apply for an internship either at an investment bank or at a management consultancy. So I applied to McKinsey company, and I blame him, Grace, why I'm not in the LLM game personally today. That was, by the way, a joke. So he provided great advice. I'm very happy with my life, but I could be doing LLMs as well with the gang.
With the gang. Where can we find you outside of work?
Sorry?
Where can we find you outside of work?
Either at a golf course or at a gym, or my son's soccer game. My son is a very avid soccer player, and he's 13, so I spend actually most of my free time with him nowadays.
Love that. Can he code?
Sorry, which code?
I was like, can he code?
Actually, he's not a big coder, although he's good at math. But my 8-year-old can code, so he's a big coder in Roblox. He loves doing Roblox games.
Love that. Well, Lari, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation. I feel like this is such a great insight for anyone who is like trying to build a company to scale. Because I feel like most of the startup insights we're hearing is like how they advance on the technology end, but like it's very hard to hear like, how does like big company or like the bigger clients actually process the technology and like the sales journey as well. Like, so it's such an amazing insights.
No, thank you, Grace, and thank you everybody who listened or will listen. I think it was a lot of fun, Grace, so enjoyed it.
Let me quickly end stream 1 sec.